Welcome to the Jumpstart Guide for Better Photography. I'll be your host, Darren Kelly. This is a great 2 DVD set, and so we've called it our second edition. It's expanded and has lots of new information. We'll give you a tour of your camera. We'll show you the buttons, the controls, the menus, and much, much more. Then we'll show you some differences between a compact camera and a digital SLR. We'll show you about the care and feeding of your memory card, and we'll take you through some shooting modes, which will help you add impact to your scene. The DVDs have been created to allow you to access the information you want using our super menu system. At any time while watching the DVD, you can select Menu using your remote control or computer mouse and access the menu system to explore some general topics or to go to specific information about that topic. Remember, at any time you can select Menu to take you back to the main page. Of course, you can also watch the DVDs straight through. In fact, we recommend it. Submenus allow you to select to play it all or select a single topic. So, get your camera in your hands and let's get started. Welcome to the tour of your camera. We're going to show you the buttons and the features of this camera to help you understand how to take better pictures. Let's take a quick look at a typical digital camera. Whether you have a state-of-the-art digital single-lens reflex camera, or DSLR, or one of the compact digital cameras, there are some features that are in common. No matter which camera you have, you'll always have an on-off switch. You'll turn on your camera with this switch, but sometimes it can also act as the switch between the playback and the shooting mode switch, as on this Canon digital camera. Some cameras automatically turn off if the camera is not used for a set period of time, which you can usually determine in one of the camera's menus. If it does not turn off, simply press the on-off button a second time and you'll shut your camera off. Remember, you'll save battery life if you turn the camera off when you're not using it. Next is the shutter release button, which, when pressed, will take a picture, or begin the process of recording a video if your camera has that feature. This is also the primary method of locking your focus point and your exposure. When you press the button, the camera will lock the focus on whatever is under the focus point of the camera. Take a look at this example. We're pointing our camera at our still life scene, and we'll press the shutter button and hold it halfway. Notice the focus point in the middle of the camera glows and shows us the focus point, and the camera focuses on the subject behind your focus point. Now we'll move the camera around the scene to better compose our shot. The focus remains locked on the original point we focused on. Most digital SLRs will have multiple focus points that you can choose from by using the rear selector button. This allows you to choose an alternate focus point, one that might not be in the center. Here's a selection of the way that looks on the back of an LCD camera on a few of our different cameras. Experiment with it and use it as a tool to help you get better pictures. Remember, the same is true for the exposure for cameras that have spot metering. Pressing and holding the shutter release will also fix your exposure at that point. Here are two shots that prove a dramatic difference. In the case of the properly exposed portrait of our model, we focused on her and also locked the exposure before changing our composition. The other one had the focus and exposure of the background, which was brighter and made the model's face darker and out of focus. All digital cameras will have a menu button. When you press it, it'll display the camera's menu system. We've done a lot of DVDs on different digital cameras, and one of the cameras had over 100 menus. Most cameras will have a few menus to allow you to make some changes to the camera. To turn the menu off, press the menu button again, or in most cases, press the shutter release button lightly. Another common button is the playback button. Here are 4 different examples of what that button can be. Everything from a mode switch or selector to this nice little chrome bar. Pressing this button will display whatever is on your camera's memory card, usually beginning with the last picture you took. You can scroll backwards or forwards using a multifunction button, or in the case of this Sony, you'll use the arrows on the touchscreen LCD. It's just as easy to delete a photo from your memory card. Most cameras use a garbage can symbol to symbolize deleting an image. Once again, here's how it looks on a variety of cameras. To delete an image, simply press the button when you are in playback mode. You'll be asked to confirm your decision, usually by pressing the Set button, or sometimes you can press the garbage can button again, and then the image is gone. Now, we don't like deleting in the field because no matter how large the LCD screen is on your camera, you'll never really know what you want to keep or what you really want to delete. So we recommend you save deleting until you get back in your own home. Now, if you know the shot is really bad, like this one for example, that's just a big pile of blur, then you can delete it. But save deleting until you get home. All cameras will have a zoom control. The zoom control allows you to zoom into a portion of the scene that you're taking a picture of, like this. All of today's cameras have a mode selection dial. This allows you to select from a number of program and digital modes when you take your pictures. Many cameras will also have an auto mode, typically shown in green on this dial. It means the camera will select everything for you: ISO, white balance, megapixels, you name it. We'll show you how not to use this mode throughout this DVD, because we strongly recommend you use one of the other modes, like the P or program mode, because you'll get the most success with this mode. Make sure you check out this chapter. Many cameras have a feature called anti-shake. When this feature is active, the camera will compensate for the slight camera movement which can occur when the camera is handheld. It's important to note that this feature won't compensate for wild movement, say, if you're trying to take a steady shot from a moving vehicle. But when you're standing still and you're holding the camera in your hand, you'll notice that the camera does move slightly, especially when you press the shutter release button to take a picture. So anti-shake is designed to compensate for a little camera shake, but not a lot, and it can turn a picture like this into this. Now keep in mind, if you're going to place your camera on a tripod or another stable surface, you'll want to turn the anti-shake feature off. When the feature's on, the camera shifts the image to compensate for the motion of the camera, but if the camera isn't moving, this digital shift will actually create unwanted movement. Keep this in mind when you use your camera's anti-shake feature. Welcome to Sensors and Megapixels. Are you confused about megapixels? Because, boy, we were. How can this little camera that costs a few $100s have 12 megapixels, and this big camera, a professional DSLR from Nikon, also have 12 megapixels and cost thousands, and even this camera, which is kind of around $2,000, and it still has 12 megapixels? Well, not to worry, because we're going to teach you a little bit about how these megapixels are different and how the different cameras and sensors process your image when you take a picture. Every camera has an imaging sensor. This is the part of your camera that acts like film used to. Before cameras went digitally, we typically used 35mm film. It was called 35mm film because the film was 35mm wide. When we went digital, the film was replaced by a silicon chip that measures the primary colors, red, green, and blue, in small squares, which we call pixels. These silicon chips are pretty expensive, and to make digital cameras affordable, the manufacturers began to develop small sensors that could make a digital camera as affordable as they are today. Each camera manufacturer uses different size sensors. In fact, I've seen a list as long as 13. I'm sure there's even more than that. But typically, the sensor for a compact digital camera will come in two different sizes. They're described in terms of a fraction. The smallest is called a 1/2.7 and the 1/1.8. For digital SLR cameras, there are typically three sizes. The smallest is the 4/3 system that Olympus, Panasonic, and Leica are using. The more typical size is called the APS-C size sensor, which even itself has a few different sizes, but roughly it's about a 1.8-inch sensor. Lastly, there's the full-frame sensor, which measures, of course, the same size as a 35mm film image. Let's take a look at a comparison between the different common sizes. You can see there's a huge difference in the size of a compact digital sensor and the typical DSLR sensor. And there's even a big difference between that and the full-frame sensor. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Each of these camera models have the same number of megapixels. This is the Nikon P5100, and this is Nikon's D300, and finally Nikon's flagship camera, the D3. Each of these cameras have 12 megapixels, but how can that be? It's simple. The smaller sensors have pixels that are smaller and closer together. The reason for this is because the manufacturers for years have been teaching us that more megapixels is good, which does have some truth in it, but what they haven't told us is that they haven't increased the size of that piece of silicon those pixels exist on. To demonstrate how the cameras perform, here's the same image shot with each different camera. Now, on this TV or computer screen, downsized to fit on this screen, they might not look all that different. But watch what happens when we select a portion of the picture. This is called a 100% crop because it's a portion of the picture as if it was in front of you at full size. You'll see the difference in the details and the shadows, and ultimate quality is evidently better as the sensor image and hence the pixels get larger and slightly farther apart. It also means if you select only a portion of the picture you took to make an enlargement, you'll see the difference in quality. So really, what we've learned is that it's the physical size of the sensor that makes the difference, and not the number of pixels it has that determines the image quality. That's why an entry-level DSLR might have only 6 megapixels in the larger APS-C sensor will produce a better-looking image than, say, a 12 megapixel camera with a smaller sensor. Anyway, I hope this has helped you understand why there's such a difference. Welcome to caring for your memory card. A memory card is the most important thing about your digital camera sometimes because if it's not working right, your camera's not going to give you the best it can do. So we'll show you how to look after your memory card to keep it operating at its best. Digital cameras record image files to a variety of memory card formats. Some use SD cards, others use memory sticks. Many of the high-end digital SLR cameras record to compact flash cards. In this chapter, we'll look at a few different memory card formats. We'll talk about preparing the cards to function properly in your camera. We'll also take a look at memory card maintenance and how to keep them working at their peak performance. No matter what type of memory card your camera uses, they all function in a similar way. Each is a solid-state memory device, meaning there are no moving parts inside. When you plug a card into your camera, it functions as though it were part of the camera itself. Information is stored on it, and the camera reads the cards very quickly. However, not all memory cards are created equal. The first thing you'll want to consider is the quality of the device. You might find a cheaper price on a memory card that isn't brand name, but like most other products, it's important to know what you're getting for your money. A cheaper memory card may not offer the same level of quality. We mentioned earlier that a memory card is a solid-state device and there are no moving parts inside, but it's still made up of many tiny elements that have to be put together properly if they're going to function properly and for a long time. And a memory card, by its nature, is going to be recorded to and erased and re-recorded to, hopefully hundreds of times. Eventually, you'll find that the cheaper option has you going back to the store over and over again to purchase a new one. I always recommend buying a high-quality, trusted brand-name memory card, even if it means you can't get that high-capacity 8GB card right now. You can always purchase one later, and the card you buy now will serve you much better. The next thing to consider is the capacity of the card. Each type of memory card has different levels of capacity. For instance, a standard SD memory card can store up to 2 gigabytes of image files, or any other type of file for that matter. This is often enough space for most photographers. However, many prefer to use memory cards that can handle even more space. For greater capacity in the family of SD cards, you'll want to purchase an SDHC card. These are the same format as the standard SD cards, but they function slightly differently from each other, and it offers a greater range of capacity, going as high as 8 gigabytes. Of course, technology is always changing, so you'll likely find an even greater memory card in the future. A standard memory card will, of course, work in your camera. You'll take great pictures and you'll enjoy your camera. But you may notice that your camera is not working as fast as the manufacturer said it would, or it's not taking as many pictures in as short a period of time as you'd hope. With a standard memory card in your camera, you might wait and wait and wait while the camera accesses the memory card, because the performance of a standard memory card is not necessarily rated for the speed your camera can click away at. So buying a professional grade card, one that has the fastest read and write speeds, will help you get the most out of your camera. Here's an example of what I mean. These two cards offer the same capacity of 8 gigabytes. This compact flash card, which retails for about $160 when I purchased it, has a read and write speed of about 10 megabytes per second, which is fast enough when you're shooting one picture at a time. But for more performance, this card, which costs over $300, offers me 45 megabytes per second. So instead of this, my camera is now capable of this. So when you're choosing a memory card, consider what you'll most often be using it for. If you're a casual photographer who intends to take the odd snapshot now and then and prefers to keep their image files small, then a cheaper, lower capacity and lower quality memory card might be for you. At lower prices, you can purchase more cards, so you can solve the capacity problem easily enough. If you take more professional photographs and you often utilize the continuous shooting mode of your camera, you might want to consider a memory card that has a higher capacity and a much faster read-write speed. Once you've found the memory card that's right for you and for your camera, you'll want to format the card for use in your camera. Memory cards can be used for a variety of purposes. They can store data from a computer, from a gaming system, an MP3 player, or thousands of devices. Each device uses a unique system of storing data on the memory card, and the card must be formatted to suit the device in question. When you first put a memory card into your camera, you'll want to format it to suit the unique properties of your camera's information gathering system. Every camera has a different method of formatting, usually involving pushing a button or selecting an item from a menu. Check your camera's user's manual to find out how to format your card. It's also a good idea to reformat your memory card every time you place it in your camera. This will help to keep the card's performance high, and it will help you keep your image files in order once you've copied them to a computer or disk or printed them out. Of course, you should always back up any existing data that might have been on the card before you format it, especially if you've used the card in another system other than your current camera. Welcome to Menus, Menus, Menus. In this chapter, we're going to take you through what can be really confusing, all of the menus that are on your typical compact digital camera or DSLR. We're going to demystify them right now. No matter which camera you purchased, you'll have a menu that you can access by pressing the menu button on the back of the camera. While every camera has a different menu system, we'll show you the most typical menu settings and how to use them to make your picture taking easier and a lot more fun. The typical setup menu allows you to determine how your camera is going to operate. So let's take a look at the few of the items you can use. Formatting. We've talked about formatting before, but click down to the Format menu and right-click with the multi-selector or press Enter. Your camera will probably warn you that all images will be deleted. To format the card, click down and press enter. It's a good idea to do it once you've transferred all the pictures that you have on the card to your computer's hard drive. LCD brightness. Many cameras allow you to alter the brightness of the LCD screen. By right-clicking, you can get to the LCD brightness screen and increase or decrease the brightness of the rear LCD. We recommend you leave the default setting, as it does provide an accurate image on most LCD screens, but if you change it once and stick with it, because if you continue to change it, you'll not be able to judge your exposure as accurately, as your screen will be lighter or darker than your manufacturer intended it to be. Video mode or video out. Your camera most likely came with a cord to allow you to connect the camera to a TV set to give a slideshow. This menu item allows you to determine which format the camera will output when connected to a TV. When you're in North America, we use the NTSC system, but if you're visiting Europe and you want to give an impromptu slideshow, simply select the PAL setting. Date and time. The next setting allows you to set the date and time. Typically, by using a combination of the buttons and control wheels, you can set the date and time, and in some instances, you can adjust it to the world time or even set it for daylight savings time. Your manual will help you out, but basically, every camera's got a date and time setting. One of the menu items you'll find on all cameras deals with the image quality and size. Most digital cameras allowed you to only record pictures in JPEG format. Many cameras now offer the option of recording your pictures in something called camera RAW format. This format, when combined with image editing software like Photoshop Elements or Photoshop CS2, allows you to edit your camera's settings after you take the picture. I'll show you what I mean. I'm opening a RAW file from a memory card of some pictures of a still life in my studio. We used a flash to light this little scene. The camera's white balance was set to automatic, which wasn't exactly perfect for the colors in the scene or the lighting coming from the flash. But because I shot this and recorded this in the RAW format, I can alter the white balance in this file, and you'll see how it changes the color in the image. I can also adjust things like the exposure, or change the amount of sharpness, alter the contrast, and, well, basically this whole list. These changes allow me to, in essence, fix mistakes I made when I took the picture. A JPEG file would not allow me to make these changes after the fact. A RAW file will be much larger than a JPEG file, but I feel the ability to make these changes might be worth spending a little more money on a larger memory card. Most point-and-shoot cameras have a specific megapixel rating. These cameras are rated at 7 megapixels, and this one is rated at 12.1. Many digital SLR cameras actually allow you to change the number of megapixels that will be used to make up an image. This allows you to affect the image size and quality depending on the image's intended use. Let's take a look at an example. The image on the right was taken with a 2.1 megapixel camera, while the image on the left was taken with a 12 megapixel camera. At this standard size, there's very little difference in the image quality. There'll be a difference if you're trying to blow up the smaller image or print just a portion of the photograph. Here are our two images side by side, but this time we've zoomed in to only a part of the picture. The 2.1 megapixel image is considerably more pixelated, while the 12 megapixel image is still sharp and clear. The other factor to consider, and most cameras offer the option, is to choose what size your image is recorded at and how much file compression is used. Let's take a look at both situations. Choosing a smaller size image will create a smaller file size on your memory card and later on your computer. This means you'll be able to store more pictures on one memory card. It's a great option if you have limited memory space and you're going to use the photos on the internet or a computer only. Here's an example. The image on the left was taken at the smallest size the camera allows, while the image on the right is the largest image the camera will allow. They both look the same on the screen, and they'll look the same on the internet. Looking below the photo, you'll notice the file size is larger on the image on the right, while the image on the left is a much, much smaller picture. As a basic rule of thumb, use the highest image quality and size for your pictures. If you plan on editing the photos with an image editing program, then select the RAW file format for recording your photos. We recommend you take your pictures at the highest possible quality to allow you the greatest flexibility. Your manual will show you how to change the size and compression or quality of your image. Welcome to white balance. Your camera needs to know what color white is in your scene. And so we'll show you how the various different white balances on your camera can work to make your pictures look better and the colors pop. Most cameras will have a white balance setting, which helps to correct for variations in color temperature. Different sources of light burn with different intensities and give off a slightly different color. This is especially apparent when they are used as light sources in photographs, and we discuss these different intensities in terms of color temperature, which is measured in kelvins instead of Fahrenheit or Celsius. For example, the light from a small flame has a color temperature of about 1700 degrees Kelvin, while a lightning bolt has a color temperature of around 30,000 kelvins. When you talk about temperature, you expect to hear some numbers, and under more professional circumstances, you may want to know what number refers to what type of light. For our purpose here, and to avoid any confusion, let's stick to the color side of color temperature for the moment. A photo lit by our lighter, or perhaps a tungsten light bulb, would have a reddish hue to it. A scene that's lit by fluorescent lights is said to add a green tint to photographs. Scenes lit by indirect light, such as through a window, often seem cold with a kind of a blue tint. You may not notice this when you see them with the naked eye, but their color temperatures are apparent when you photograph under each source of light. White balance calibrates your digital camera by selecting an element in your scene and calling it white, and then adjusting all the other colors in kind. This photo was taken under fluorescent lighting with no color correction. Here's the same image, corrected for the green hue that the fluorescent light adds to the picture. Your white balance setting can make all the difference in your picture, changing a cold-looking image into a warm portrait. We'll show you how each setting can affect the color of your finished pictures. You may find that your camera doesn't have every setting that we mention here, but don't worry, we're going to cover all of them to show you the entire range that is possible in the digital camera world. Then you can experiment with your camera to see how the settings work best for you. If you want the camera to automatically set white balance, you can set AWB or auto white balance. In this setting, the camera will use its image sensor to select the appropriate color temperature. We found this setting to be pretty accurate under most shooting conditions. You can also select a white balance preset, which sets your camera to see a proper white under a particular set of lighting circumstances. Incandescent sets the white balance to account for lighting under typical tungsten lights. This is the fluorescent setting. You might select to use this when you're shooting primarily under fluorescent lighting, such as an office, store, or school. This is the flash setting, and this is best used with the camera's built-in flash, or optional flash, or even a studio flash system. If it's primarily cloudy outside, this cloudy setting would be your choice. The shade setting is used when you're shooting subjects that are in the shade, but perhaps the camera is in the sunshine. Here's the same photo taken with a selection of white balances. You can clearly see how the white balance changes under each preset. Some cameras allow you to adjust the white balance in some way to give you even more control over this feature. Many offer a sliding scale, and some show a colored grid to help you make your selection. Be aware that when you make changes to your camera's preset white balance settings, you'll alter how your camera corrects for lighting issues in your scene. Earlier, I promised that we'd stick to the color side of the color temperature discussion. Well, now it's time to venture into the numbers side of things, because another common white balance setting deals directly with color temperature, which allows you to select an actual number to correspond to the lighting conditions in your scene. Remember our color temperature scale? Well, it's time to add some numbers to it. Your camera lets you dial in color temperature from 2500 degrees Kelvin to 10,000 degrees Kelvin. A tungsten lamp has a color temperature of about 2800 degrees Kelvin. A typical fluorescent bulb is around 3400 degrees. Indirect sunlight weighs in at around 5500 K, and direct sunlight can be as bright as 9000 K or even more. With this in mind, if you know the color temperature of the lighting in your scene, you can dial it in here and your camera will give you a very precise white balance setting. Many cameras will allow you to perform a manual white balance to take a reading of the light values that are in your current scene and alter the colors accordingly. Some cameras actually allow you to perform multiple manual white balances and save them so that they can be called up when you find yourself in a similar lighting situation. Check the manual that came with your camera to find out exactly what button to press or what menu to access. However, part of the process will be the same no matter what camera you're using. To start, you'll require a white card. Now, all white cards are not the same color, so you can select from a warmer white to a colder white. Place the card in front of the camera under the lighting conditions you want to use. Follow your camera's directions to prepare the camera to take a manual white balance. Zoom in so the white card fills your screen. Then complete the process according to your manual's instructions. Sometimes you'll take a reading that is either far too dark or way too bright. This makes it difficult for the camera to achieve an accurate white balance, and most cameras will give you a warning that you'll need to take another white balance. Welcome to our chapter about ISO. ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light, and you can select from various different settings on your camera. We'll show you what the various settings look like, what happens as you go to higher ISO speeds, and much more. We've already discussed how your camera's aperture and shutter speeds can affect the look of that photo. Those settings deal with the light and color information as it passes through the lens of your camera. The next setting that we're concerned about is called ISO, and it deals with how your camera interprets your scene once it has passed through the lens. Every digital camera contains an image sensor. This collects the light and color information from your scene and translates it into a photograph. But depending on the amount of light that's available from the scene, you may find that your camera, and more specifically your camera's image sensor, has a difficult time recording an accurate picture. You can affect your camera's light sensitivity by changing the ISO value. Every camera has a slightly different way of changing this value, but most have a button or menu that allow you to select the ISO sensitivity. ISO gets its name from the organization that deals with creating standards in many different industries. It's called the International Standards Organization. When film was the medium we recorded our photos on, the initials ISO and a number indicated the sensitivity of film to light. The higher the number, the higher the sensitivity the film was to light. It also meant an increase of grain. Today the same is true. Except in the digital world, we no longer have to change film to change the camera's sensitivity to light. We can simply dial it in. This feature allows you to take pictures in a setting that is darker as you would increase the ISO number. It can mean the difference between getting the shot using available light or not getting it at all. Here's the same picture taken at two different ISO settings. Cutting to a close-up, you'll see that as the ISO increases, the digital noise also increases. This means that while a higher ISO value allows you to see more light in a darkened image, the trade-off is that your scene will not be as crisp. Now, depending on the sophistication of your digital camera, you'll have varying levels of control over your ISO setting. No matter what type of camera you purchase, from point and shoot to the highest end digital SLR, there are some basic guidelines that you always set the proper ISO for your scene and for the style of photograph that you want to record. Select the lowest ISO you can when you have lots of light and minimal action, like this photo of a tulip field. Select a slightly higher ISO when you have good light but fast action. This shot of the sea lions was taken on a rough sea, so to stop the action I used a high ISO setting and a faster shutter speed. Now this photo, lit by a single candle, would not have been possible without using a high ISO. So select the ISO that is most appropriate to your scene. It's okay to make mistakes, and remember, one of the big benefits of digital is that it allows you to take a second picture or even a third if the first one is not what you want. Now, I have a pet peeve, and it's the one setting I recommend you do not use. Most digital cameras will give you the option of setting an auto ISO. This allows the camera to find an ISO value that it feels is appropriate to the scene. Some cameras will give you some control of the auto ISO setting, allowing you to select the highest and lowest ISO that the camera is allowed to consider, but this just isn't good enough control in our opinion. Using this feature, you'll never know what ISO your camera is selecting, and you will not learn how to choose your own settings. If you want to improve your photography skills and learn a bit more, we'd recommend selecting the ISO yourself. And remember to use a tripod or another stable surface when you increase your camera's ISO setting. This will help to steady your shot and take more precise images in low light situations. If you're using RAW and an image editing program, you can always go back at the end and adjust the white balance. That's kind of one of the coolest things about shooting RAW and working with something like Photoshop Elements. Welcome to our chapter about shooting modes. Shooting modes are usually displayed on a dial or something at the top of your camera, and they can be kind of confusing to first-time users. So we'll take a few minutes and show you how the various different shooting modes can work best for you. No matter what camera you own, chances are there are a number of shooting modes or program modes available to you. Let's take a look at these modes, how to use them, and see some examples of photos taken in these modes. Generally, the first mode is called the auto setting. The auto setting means the camera will make all the decisions for you. It'll select the shutter speed, how fast the shutter opens and closes, the aperture, which is how wide the lens is, and in many cases it will also select the ISO. It might also select whether the flash will fire or not, and other special functions your camera might have. We recommend this setting to people who might be a little intimidated by all the settings. The auto setting will help you get more shots that are in focus and sharp if you aren't comfortable using one of the other modes. But we'll show you how to use those other modes next. The P stands for Program Mode. Program Mode lets the camera determine the shutter speed and the aperture. Program modes have the ability to select what the camera thinks is the optimum setting for the scene you're photographing. Many photographers will shoot most of their shots in Program Mode. Some program modes have an option called Program Plus, and it allows you to remain in program mode, but you can alter the combination. Making the shutter speed a little faster or a higher number will guarantee you stop fast action. We recommend you use program mode for most of your day-to-day and snapshot shooting. The A stands for Aperture Priority Mode. Some cameras will have an Aperture Priority Mode. This allows you to manually select the aperture or how open the lens is, while the camera will select the appropriate shutter speed automatically for you. You would want to use this mode if you want to increase or decrease the depth of field. Depth of field is the amount of your picture that is in focus from front to back. It's altered by changing the camera's aperture. We'll go into greater detail about the relationship between aperture and depth of field on the second disc, but for now, keep in mind that a smaller aperture number, also called an f-stop, means that the lens shutter will have a larger opening when the picture is taken. S or Shutter Priority Mode. Like Aperture Priority, some cameras will have a Shutter Priority Mode. In this case, you might want to increase the shutter speed to stop the action of a moving subject. The larger the number, the faster the shutter speed. Here's an example of a few shots where we've had a fast shutter speed and another when we didn't. Some cameras will call the S or Shutter Priority Mode the TV mode. M or Manual Mode. Higher-end cameras will have a manual mode. This means you can select both the shutter speed and the aperture. You can experiment with this mode if your camera has it. You might create some interesting effects. For the majority of your shooting, we recommend either the program mode or one of your camera's special modes, Let's take a look at those next. All of today's digital cameras come with various photo modes designed to help you capture the perfect moment. The camera makes some adjustments to help you shoot the perfect picture based on the scene type you've selected. It'll adjust the shutter, aperture. Sometimes it'll also adjust the contrast, the color saturation, and sharpness. Almost every camera has a landscape mode. In landscape, the camera will typically increase the saturation on green and blue colors, and it'll add some contrast and sharpen the edges of the outlines. Here's a comparison of a landscape shot in program mode and one in landscape mode. Like landscape, almost every camera will have a portrait mode. In portrait mode, the camera will adjust the shutter and aperture to make the background blurry, while keeping your subject sharp. Many cameras will also have the landscape and portrait modes in a night setting too. If you're planning to use the night mode, you must use a tripod, as the camera will choose a slow shutter speed to capture all of the details of the scene. In this photo, we use the night landscape mode and a tripod. In the night portrait mode, the camera will use the built-in flash, but it'll delay the flash to allow your camera to record some of the lights in the background in a blur or light streak. This can be very creative. Give it a try. Don't leave the camera home on those great evenings out. Many cameras will have a close-up mode. Use this mode when you're shooting close-ups or macro shots, which are extreme close-ups. This will adjust your camera's lens to allow you to get super close. Give it a try. The last popular mode on digital cameras is the panorama mode. In this mode, you can automatically assemble a picture that is wider than your standard lens. What it does, in fact, is allow you to combine multiple shots into one big file. This is a fun mode and great on vacations. There may be others on your camera that we've not covered here. Once again, your manual will help you. Well, good for you. You've made it to the end of disc 1. There's more coming up though. On our next disc, we're going to show you things about taking better pictures and improving your shots. We're going to look at using flash and maybe even some studio lighting, and we'll also take you through Photoshop and some cool accessories that you need. Put the other disc in and let's get started.